Oh, come on! You really expect anyone here to believe you paid for that Officer Daniel Reynolds didn't lower his voice, didn't even try. He stepped in closer, 2 fingers casually lifting the edge of the shopping bag in her hand, uninvited intrusive, like he was inspecting evidence, not someone's property. A short, dry laugh escaped him. Luxury store. $5,000 items. And somehow, you just walk out with it, he added, glancing at his partner with a smirk that didn't bother hiding itself. Officer Carter circled slightly behind her, slow, deliberate cutting off any space she might have had. Yeah, Carter muttered loud enough for the growing crowd. We see this all the time. A few people stopped, watched. Phones rose. Phones. Reynolds tilted his head, eyes dragging from her shoes, up to her face, lingering just long enough to make the message clear. Let me guess, he said, voice dripping with mockery. Receipt got lost. His hand closed around her wrist. Not gently. Don't move. The woman didn't flinch, didn't argue. And somehow that calm made them push harder. Because in 5 minutes, they would realize just how badly they misjudged her. But right now, she was exactly what they decided she was, or so they thought. The Arlington Square Mall didn't rush. It never had to. Set just 15 minutes outside Washington, D.C., in the polished corridors of Arlington, Virginia, it carried a quiet kind of wealth, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Marble floors reflected soft golden lighting. Glass storefronts displayed items most people would never casually touch, let alone buy. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and new leather. On a Saturday afternoon, at exactly 3:42 p.m., the mall was alive, but controlled. Conversations were low. Footsteps measured. Even the laughter seemed curated. That was when Aaliyah Bennett stepped inside. She didn't rush, either. At 32, Aaliyah carried herself with a calm that wasn't practiced. It was lived. Her posture was straight, but not rigid, her movements deliberate without being slow. She wore an ivory blazer over a fitted black top, tailored dark jeans, and understated heels that clicked softly against the marble with each step. Her long black hair fell neatly over her shoulders, framing a face that revealed very little, unless you were paying attention. And most people weren't, at least not at first. She passed a jewelry store without stopping, glanced briefly at a display of watches Rolex Cartier before continuing on. She wasn't browsing in the way most shoppers did. She knew where she was going. Maison Laurent. The boutique sat near the center of the mall's upper level, its entrance framed by minimalist glass and brushed gold. Inside, every item was spaced deliberately, each piece given room to breathe, because when something cost thousands of dollars, clutter wasn't just unnecessary, it was offensive. Aaliyah stepped inside at 3:47 p.m. The temperature shifted slightly cooler, controlled. A sales associate standing near the front looked up. Emily Carter. Mid-20s. Blonde. Immaculate makeup. Smile ready, but selective. Good afternoon, Emily said automatically, though her tone lacked the warmth her words suggested. Her eyes moved quickly. Shoes. Jeans. Blazer. Then back to Aaliyah's face. A pause. Small. Almost invisible. But it was there. Aaliyah noticed. She always did. I'm looking for the Vérité collection, Aaliyah said calmly, her voice even professional. Emily blinked once as if recalibrating. That line starts at around 4,500, she replied, her smile tightening just slightly. Was there something specific you had in mind? There it was, not a question. A filter. Aaliyah met her gaze without flinching. Yes, she said simply. The black leather shoulder bag. Gold hardware. Another pause. This one longer. Emily gestured toward the back of the store, though she didn't immediately move. "It's over there," she said. No offer to guide, no enthusiasm, just direction. Aaliyah walked past her. Inside the boutique was quiet, almost too quiet. Two other customers browsed near the far wall. One glanced up briefly, then leaned closer to her companion, whispering something that ended with a subtle glance in Aaliyah's direction. Aaliyah didn't react. She reached the display. The Verite bag sat under a soft spotlight, its black leather smooth edges precise, the gold hardware catching the light just enough to draw the eye without demanding it. A small tag rested discreetly beside it. $4,800. Aaliyah picked it up. Carefully. Not hesitant. Just precise. Her fingers traced the stitching briefly before she nodded to herself. This was the one. She turned back toward the front. Emily was watching. Not openly, but not discreetly either. "Ready to check out?" Aaliyah asked. Emily hesitated just a fraction too long. "Of course," she said, stepping behind the counter. The bag was placed gently on the glass surface. Emily scanned the tag, her expression neutral, but her movements slower than necessary. "Will that be all?" she asked. "Yes." Aaliyah reached into her bag and removed a sleek black card. She placed it on the counter. Emily's eyes flicked down, then back up. Something shifted. "Do you have another form of payment?" Emily asked, her tone light too light. "Sometimes these systems can be a little unpredictable." The words were casual. The implication wasn't. Aaliyah's expression didn't change. "This one will work," she said. Emily smiled again, pressed a few buttons, inserted the card, waited. A second passed, then two, then a soft beep. Emily's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh," she said. "That's strange." She turned the screen slightly, though not enough for Aaliyah to fully see it. "It says the transaction didn't go through." Aaliyah's gaze dropped briefly to the terminal, then back up. "Try again." Emily hesitated, then complied. Another attempt. Another pause. Another beep. This time Emily exhaled through her nose, almost as if confirming something she already expected. "Yeah, it's still not working," she said, her voice just loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. "Do you have another card? Or maybe cash?" The two women near the wall had stopped pretending not to listen. One of them crossed her arms. Aaliyah remained still. "No," she said calmly. "Run it again." Emily's smile faded slightly. "I've already tried twice," she replied. "At this point, it might be better if we run it again." The words were quiet, but firm. Emily's fingers hovered over the machine. Then she sighed, soft, but audible. "All right." She inserted the card again, pressed confirm, waited. And as the seconds stretched, something else began to form in the space between them. Not just tension, assumption, and just behind it, judgment. From the corner of her eye, Emily caught the attention of someone standing near the office door. A man in a dark suit. Watching. Waiting. Aaliyah didn't turn, but she felt it. The shift. The escalation that hadn't been spoken yet. And when the terminal beeped a third time, Emily didn't even look surprised. She just looked validated. "I'm sorry," she said louder now. "It's being declined." The word hung in the air. Declined. Not delayed, not error. Declined. Aaliyah slowly exhaled. Then she reached forward just enough to slide the card back toward herself. Get your manager, she said. Emily blinked. Excuse me, your manager, Aaliyah repeated, her voice steady. Now. There was no anger, no raised tone, but something in the way she said it made the request feel less like a request. Emily hesitated, then gave a short, tight nod. Of course. She turned and walked quickly toward the back. The man in the suit was already moving. Aaliyah stood alone at the counter, the bag still resting between her and the register. The two customers still watching. The air still quiet, but no longer calm, because something had shifted, and whatever happened next was not going to stay contained inside that boutique. The man who stepped out from the back office didn't rush. He never needed to. Dalton Reeves had built his entire reputation on control, measured tone, calculated pauses, and a presence that made people second-guess themselves before he even spoke. Mid-40s, perfectly tailored charcoal suit, silver tie, and a gaze that assessed before it acknowledged. By the time he reached the counter, he already had a version of the situation in his head. And in that version, Aaliyah Bennett was the problem. Good afternoon, Reeves said, his voice smooth, polite, professionally distant. I'm Dalton Reeves, store manager. I understand there's been an issue with payment. Aaliyah met his eyes. There's been an issue with your machine, she said calmly. A slight pause. Barely noticeable. But enough. Reeves gave a thin smile. Our systems are checked regularly, he replied. They're quite reliable. Not a denial, a dismissal. He stepped closer to the terminal, glancing at the screen, as if confirming what he already believed. And yet he added almost casually, it's been declined multiple times. The word again. Declined. This time he didn't lower his voice. Didn't need to. Because now the attention wasn't just from two curious customers. A third person had stepped closer. Then a fourth. The subtle gravity of conflict pulling them in. Aaliyah rested one hand lightly on the counter. Run it again, she said. Reeves didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying her, not with curiosity, but with something sharper. We've already attempted that, he said. At some point, it becomes less about the machine and more about the situation. Emily stood just behind him, arms folded now, her earlier politeness gone. It's standard procedure, she added, when transactions fail like this. Aaliyah's gaze shifted briefly to her, then back to Reeves. And what procedure is that, she asked. Reeves's smile didn't change. Verification. The word sounded neutral, but the tone wasn't. Aaliyah let out a slow breath. What exactly are you trying to verify, she asked. Reeves gestured lightly toward the bag, still resting on the counter. That high-value merchandise is being purchased legitimately, he said. We've had incidents. There it was again. Incidents. Always vague, always suggestive. Aaliyah's fingers tapped once against the glass surface. Soft, controlled. And you've decided this is one of those incidents, she asked. Reeves didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, lowered his voice just enough to feel private but still loud enough for those nearby to hear. We simply need to be cautious, he said, especially when things don't add up. Behind him, one of the onlookers let out a quiet hum as if in agreement. Aaliyah didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them. She just stood there. Still. You're making an assumption, she said. Reeves straightened. I'm following protocol. Another lie dressed as policy. Aaliyah reached into her bag again. Slowly, deliberately. She pulled out her phone. Reeves's eyes sharpened slightly. Is there something else I can assist you with? He asked. Yes, Aaliyah said. She looked directly at him. Call your system provider. Verify the transaction on your end. Reeves let out a soft, almost amused breath. That won't be necessary. Of course it wouldn't, because verification was never the goal. Control was. A beat passed. Then Reeves glanced toward Emily. A silent exchange. Permission given. Permission. Emily turned slightly toward the security desk near the entrance of the boutique. Aaliyah saw it. "Don't do that," she said quietly. Emily hesitated. Reeves didn't. "I'm afraid we have to," he replied. "At this point, it's procedure." Another word. Another shield. Emily gave a small nod and walked toward the front. Aaliyah's jaw tightened. Not in panic, in recognition. Because now it wasn't about a declined card. It wasn't about a bag. It was about escalation. Within seconds, a uniformed mall security guard appeared at the entrance. Mid-50s, stocky build, expression already set somewhere between suspicion and certainty. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. Reeves turned slightly, his posture shifting subtly, aligning himself with authority. Attempted transaction. Multiple declines. Customer refusing to provide alternate payment or verification. Each phrase carefully chosen. Each one tilting the narrative. The guard nodded slowly, then looked at Aaliyah. Not neutrally, not openly hostile, but already decided. "Ma'am," he said, stepping closer. "I'm going to need you to come with me while we sort this out." There it was. The pivot. From customer to suspect. Aaliyah didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The guard's expression hardened slightly. "Then we'll have to escalate this," he replied. Behind him, more people had gathered. Phones were up now, recording. Whispers spreading. She tried to steal it. "I knew something was off. Look at her." Aaliyah heard every word, but her face didn't change, not even slightly. Reeves folded his arms. "This is exactly what we try to avoid," he said, almost as if disappointed. "Situations like this, becoming public." The irony sat heavy in the air, because he was the one who made it public. Aaliyah looked at him one last time. Long enough, steady enough. Then she spoke. "You still have time to fix this." Reeves didn't blink. "I believe we're handling it appropriately." Aaliyah gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming something to herself. Then she reached for her phone again. But this time, the guard stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need you to keep your hands visible," he said firmly. Aaliyah paused, looked at him, then slowly lowered her hand. Not in surrender, in calculation. Because now the next move mattered. And across the mall, somewhere beyond the glass storefronts and polished floors, a call was about to be made. One that none of them were prepared for. But for now, to them, she was just another problem. Standing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong assumptions made about her. And they were about to take it even further. The moment the word escalate left the guard's mouth, the air changed. Not dramatically, subtly, but enough. Because escalation didn't mean clarity. It meant pressure. It meant authority being applied, whether it was justified or not. And within less than 90 seconds, the quiet tension inside Maison Laurent spilled beyond its glass walls. 2 uniformed officers stepped in. Officer Daniel Reynolds entered first broad shoulders clipped movements, the kind of posture that said he expected compliance before he even spoke. Behind him was Officer Mark Carter, slightly younger, quieter, but observant in a way that suggested he noticed more than he said. Reynolds didn't ask what happened. He looked and decided. "All right," he said, his voice cutting clean through the murmurs. "What's going on?" Reeves stepped forward immediately, positioning himself just slightly to the side, close enough to be involved, far enough to look neutral. "Attempted purchase," he explained. "High-value item. Multiple declined transactions. Customer refusing to cooperate with verification." Each word landed like a brick. Reynolds nodded slowly, then turned toward Aaliyah. His eyes moved the same way Emily's had earlier. Shoes, clothes, posture, then her face. A faint smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, not unkindly, but not respectfully either. "We're going to need to sort this out real quick." Aaliyah met his gaze. "It's already been explained," she said. "Your system is faulty. Run the transaction again." Reynolds let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Yeah," he said. "That's not how this works." He stepped closer. Too close. His hand rested casually on his belt, not aggressive, but intentional. "Here's what we're going to do," he continued. "You're going to provide valid payment or identification so we can verify what's going on." Aaliyah didn't move. "You have no legal basis to detain me," she said calmly. Reynolds's expression shifted. Not anger, annoyance. "Didn't say I was detaining you," he replied. "I'm asking you to cooperate." The difference sounded important, but felt thin. Behind him, Carter watched quietly. His eyes flicked briefly toward the terminal, then back to Aaliyah. There was a flicker of something there. Doubt. Small, but present. Reynolds didn't notice, or didn't care. "Let me see some ID," Reynolds said, extending his hand, not fully, just enough to signal expectation. Aaliyah didn't reach for her bag. Instead, she asked a question. "On what grounds?" Reynolds's jaw tightened slightly. "On the grounds that we're investigating a situation involving potential fraud," he said. There it was, the word finally spoken. Fraud. The crowd reacted almost instantly. A ripple of murmurs. Phones lifted higher. A woman near the entrance leaned closer to her companion. "I knew it," she whispered. Aaliyah heard it. Still didn't react. "You don't have evidence of fraud," she said. Reynolds tilted his head. "We have enough to ask questions. And I've answered them. Not the ones that matter." The tension snapped tighter. Carter shifted his weight slightly. "Maybe we should just run the card again," he muttered low enough that it almost didn't carry. Reynolds didn't even look at him. "We're past that," he said. Then louder, "Ma'am, last chance. ID." The words weren't shouted, but they weren't optional. Aaliyah looked at his hand. Still extended. Still waiting. Then back at his face. "No." The word landed softly, but it echoed. For half a second, no one moved. Then Reynolds exhaled slowly through his nose. "All right," he said. "That's how you want to play it." He stepped slightly to the side. A subtle shift. But it changed everything. Because now he wasn't just talking to her. He was positioning her. Mark Reynolds said, finally glancing at his partner stay with her. Carter hesitated. Just a fraction. Then nodded. "Ma'am," Carter said, his tone quieter, less sharp. "We just need to make sure everything checks out." Aaliyah turned her head slightly toward him. "You know this isn't right," she said. Carter didn't answer. Didn't deny it either. Reynolds stepped back toward Reeves. "Any surveillance?" he asked. Reeves nodded quickly. "Of course. We can pull it," Good Reynolds said. "Because right now this looks like attempted theft." The word hit harder than fraud. More direct. More public. The crowd shifted again. A man near the doorway raised his phone higher. Zoomed in. Someone else whispered, "She's done." Aaliyah stood still. Completely still. But inside, something had changed. Not fear, not panic. Decision. Because now they weren't just implying. They were building a case, out of assumption, out of nothing. Reynolds turned back toward her. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to stay right here while we sort this out." Aaliyah's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not being detained, remember," she said. Reynolds smiled. This time it didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said, "but you're not leaving either." There it was. The contradiction. Spoken without hesitation. Behind him, Carter shifted again. His gaze moved from Reynolds to Aaliyah, then to the growing crowd. Something wasn't sitting right. But he didn't speak. Not yet. Reynolds reached out suddenly. Not to grab, but to touch the shopping bag. Just enough. Just long enough. "To make sure nothing goes missing," he said. Aaliyah's hand moved instantly, stopping his. Not aggressively, but firmly. "Don't touch my property," she said. The contact lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Reynolds froze, then slowly looked down at her hand, then back up. The smirk returned, bigger this time. "Careful," he said quietly. "You don't want to add resisting to the list." The word hung there. Resisting. The escalation had found its next step, and everyone felt it. The crowd leaned in, phones steady, breaths held. Because now, it wasn't just about a bag, or a card, or even a store. It was about power. And who got to use it? Aaliyah slowly removed her hand, stepped back half an inch, not retreating, repositioning. Her voice when she spoke again was quieter than before, but sharper. "You're making a mistake," she said. Reynolds nodded, as if he'd heard that 100 times. "Yeah," he replied, "we'll take that risk." And just like that, the line had been crossed, no longer a misunderstanding. No longer a misunderstanding that could be quietly corrected. Now, it was something else. Something public. Something recorded. Something that in just a few minutes would become impossible to undo. But for now, to them, she was exactly what they decided she was. And they were about to push even further. The space around Aaliyah tightened without anyone saying it out loud. It wasn't a physical wall. Not yet. But it felt like one. Officer Carter shifted closer to her left side. Not touching. Not threatening. But close enough that any step forward would brush against him. Officer Reynolds remained directly in front of her, angled, slightly cutting off the clean path toward the boutique exit. Behind her, the counter, the bag, the eyes. All watching. All waiting. "Let's not make this more complicated than it already is," Reynolds said, his voice calm, in the way that suggested control, not peace. "You're still standing here. That's cooperation. Let's keep it that way." Aaliyah didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted past him for a brief second, just enough to register the crowd that had grown twice its size in the last minute. At least 12 people now, some pretending to browse, most not pretending at all. Phones were no longer subtle. They were steady. Focused. Recording. Aaliyah returned her attention to Reynolds. "You're creating the complication," she said. Reynolds gave a small shrug. "Or maybe I'm responding to it." His hand moved to his belt again, this time slower, more deliberate. Not reaching for anything yet, but reminding her it was all there. Authority. Force. Options. "Last chance," he added. "ID, proof of purchase. Something." Aaliyah's eyes held his. "You already know I didn't steal anything." The statement wasn't emotional. It wasn't defensive. It was, factual. And that irritated him more than denial ever could. Reynolds let out a quiet exhale through his nose. "You keep saying that," he replied, "but you're not showing anything that backs it up." Behind him, one of the onlookers whispered, "She won't show it because she doesn't have it." Another voice responded quietly, "Or because she doesn't have to." The tension split just slightly, but Reynolds ignored both. He stepped half a pace closer. "You think this is about what you have to do?" he said softly. "It's about what happens next if you don't." Aaliyah didn't step back, didn't blink. "Go ahead," she said. 2 words. Flat. Unmoved. And suddenly the air shifted again, because now it wasn't just pressure. It was defiance. And defiance in a situation like this demanded a response. Reynolds's jaw tightened. He looked at Carter. Just a glance. But it was enough. Carter hesitated. "Daniel." He started low. Reynolds cut him off without turning. "Stay with me on this." It wasn't a suggestion. Carter swallowed whatever he was about to say, and nodded. Slowly. Reluctantly. Reynolds turned back to Aaliyah. "All right," he said. "We're going to secure the situation until we can verify everything." The phrasing was careful, legal enough to sound justified, vague enough to stretch. Aaliyah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Secure," she repeated. Reynolds didn't answer. Instead, his hand moved. This time not just resting on his belt, but reaching. The metallic sound was soft, but unmistakable. Click. The handcuffs. He didn't raise them yet, didn't swing them, just held them at his side, visible, intentional. The reaction was immediate. A collective inhale from the crowd. A few people leaned forward. One person whispered, "Are they really about to cuff her?" Another voice, for what, Reynolds ignored them, focused only on Aaliyah. "Turn around," he said. Not loud, but final. Aaliyah looked at the cuffs, then back at his face. "For what charge?" she asked. Reynolds tilted his head slightly. "Obstruction. Failure to cooperate. We can figure out the rest downtown." The words came too easily, too practiced, as if the justification didn't matter, only the outcome. Aaliyah's posture didn't change, but something in her expression did. Not fear, not anger. Clarity. "You're about to make this worse," she said. Reynolds almost smiled. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "You keep saying that." Carter shifted again, more noticeably this time. "Maybe we should slow this down," he said louder now. "We don't have confirmation of Reynolds." Snapped a look at him. "Sharp, immediate." "We have enough," he said. Carter held his gaze for a second longer than before, then looked away. The moment passed, but it left something behind. Doubt. And everyone felt it. Reynolds turned back, lifted the cuffs slightly. "Last time," he said. "Turn around." Aaliyah didn't move. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. 3. Then, from somewhere near the back of the crowd, a child's voice broke through. "Mom, what did she do?" The mother didn't answer immediately, because she didn't know, because no one did. But that didn't stop the narrative from forming, didn't stop the judgment from settling in. Aaliyah closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. And when she spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been the entire time, but sharper, more certain. "I'm not turning around," she said. Reynolds nodded slowly, as if expecting that answer. "Okay," he said. And then he stepped forward, close enough now that there was no space left between authority and resistance, Carter moved instinctively, not to assist, not immediately, but to be ready. Because now there was no turning this back into a conversation. The line had been crossed. Publicly. Irreversibly. Reynolds reached for her wrist. This time not to warn, not to test, to act. And just before his fingers made contact, Aaliyah spoke again. Clear, measured, final. I'm making a call. Reynolds didn't stop. You can do that later, he said. No, she replied. Now louder, now firm. I'm doing it now. Her hand moved. Fast, but not aggressive. Straight to her phone. Reynolds's grip closed around her wrist. Tight. Immediate. Not right now, he said. The words weren't a suggestion. The crowd reacted. A ripple of movement. Phones adjusting. Zooming. Capturing. Because this was the moment. The one that would be replayed. Rewatched. Questioned. Aaliyah didn't pull away. Didn't struggle. She just looked at him. Directly. And said, You really should let me make that call. Reynolds held her wrist. Firm. Unmoving. Yeah, he said. I don't think so. And just like that, the last opportunity to step back disappeared. Because somewhere far beyond the polished floors and controlled lighting of Arlington Square Mall, that call was about to matter, more than anyone here was prepared for. The moment his hand tightened around her wrist, the situation stopped being ambiguous. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was control. Visible. Recorded. And spreading. Let go, Aaliyah said, her voice low but carrying. Not pleading, not raised, just precise. Reynolds didn't move. Relax, he replied almost casually. You're the one escalating this. The irony went unnoticed. Or ignored. Around them the crowd had thickened into something else entirely. No longer just curious onlookers, now they were witnesses. Some leaning forward, others stepping back just enough to frame the moment through their screens. A man near the entrance whispered into his phone. They've got her detained. Yeah, right in front of Maison Laurent. Another voice, sharper. Finally. Someone doing their job. But not everyone agreed. A woman in her 40s stepped slightly closer, her brow furrowed. She hasn't done anything, she said quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough to be heard. Reynolds turned his head just enough to catch the sound, then dismissed it. Because dissent in his mind didn't outweigh authority. Mark, he said without taking his eyes off Aaliyah. Keep an eye on the crowd. Carter nodded, though his attention kept drifting back to Aaliyah. To her expression. To the way she wasn't reacting the way people usually did. No panic, no anger, no attempt to pull free. Just stillness. And that unsettled him. Because people who had something to hide, they didn't look like that. Reynolds leaned slightly closer, lowered his voice. This is your moment to cooperate, he said. Don't waste it. Aaliyah held his gaze. You've already wasted yours, she replied. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not doubt, but irritation. The kind that came from being challenged. Publicly. His grip tightened. Not enough to injure, but enough to make a point. People like you always think the rules don't apply, he said louder now. The sentence landed. Heavy. Intentional. And the reaction was immediate. Some of the crowd nodded. Others stiffened. The woman who had spoken earlier crossed her arms, her expression darkening. That's not what this is, she said under her breath. But again, no one with authority acknowledged it. Aaliyah didn't look away. People like me, she asked. Reynolds shrugged slightly. You heard me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. Because now, it wasn't just about suspicion. It wasn't just about a transaction. It was about assumption, out loud, on record. Carter shifted again, this time more visibly. Daniel, he said, quieter but firmer. We should keep this professional. Reynolds didn't even turn. I am? He replied. Carter hesitated, then added, We don't have confirmation of anything yet. That got a reaction. Reynolds finally looked at him, a sharp glance. Then we get it, he said. After we secure the situation. The word again. Secure. As if repetition made it legitimate. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, then looked past Reynolds toward the front of the store, toward the open space beyond, toward the world outside this moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, still calm, but colder. You're not securing anything, she said. You're performing. Reynolds let out a short laugh. Yeah, he said, for who Aaliyah's eyes flicked just briefly toward the phones. Dozens now, raised, recording every second. For them, she said. The realization hit. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Because suddenly Reynolds became aware not just of the situation, but of how it looked. Of how it would look. Later. Still. He didn't step back. Didn't release her. Because backing down now in front of all these people, that wasn't an option. Instead, he doubled down. Good, he said. Let them see. He adjusted his stance, straightened slightly, projecting control. Let them see what happens when someone refuses to cooperate. The narrative. Set, spoken, framed. Aaliyah shook her head once. Small. Disappointed. You still don't understand, she said. Reynolds smirked. Then help me understand, he replied. A beat passed. Then Aaliyah spoke 4 words. Quiet. Measured. But different from anything she had said before. You're out of time. Reynolds blinked once. Confusion, brief, almost invisible, crossed his face. Then it was gone. Yeah, he said. I don't think so. Behind him, Carter turned his head, listening. Because something had changed. Not in the store. Outside. At first it was faint, barely noticeable beneath the hum of conversation and the quiet whir of escalators. But then it grew. A low, distant sound. Engines. More than one. Approaching. Fast. Some of the people near the entrance shifted. One person stepped aside, peering out through the glass. What is that? Someone whispered. Reynolds didn't turn. Didn't react. Because in his mind, nothing outside this moment mattered. He still had control. He still had authority. And the woman in front of him. She was still just a suspect. Still just a problem to be handled. Still just, ma'am, last warning, he said, tightening his grip slightly. Turn around. Aaliyah didn't move, didn't resist, didn't comply. She just looked at him. And for the first time, there was something in her eyes. Not anger, not fear. Certainty. The kind that didn't come from hope. The kind that came from knowing. They're already here, she said. Reynolds frowned slightly. What are you? The sound hit then. Clear. Close. Multiple vehicles pulling up hard. Doors opening. Voices. Sharp. Coordinated. The crowd reacted instantly. Heads turning. Phones shifting. The energy in the room snapping in a completely different direction. Carter turned fully this time. Eyes narrowing. Trying to see. Trying to understand. Reynolds didn't move. Not yet. Because whatever was happening outside couldn't possibly be connected to this. Couldn't possibly matter. Not here. Not now. Not to him, and that was the mistake. The sound didn't fade. It grew louder, closer, deliberate. Not the random hum of traffic outside the mall, but something coordinated, controlled, intentional. Doors slammed. Heavy. Multiple. Voices followed, sharp, precise, carrying authority that didn't need volume to be heard. Inside Maison Laurent, the crowd reacted first. Heads turned toward the entrance. Phones shifted direction. A few people instinctively stepped aside, clearing a path without knowing why. Carter turned fully now. His body angled away from Aaliyah, attention pulled toward the glass storefront. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. Reynolds didn't move. Not yet. Because he refused to. Because acknowledging something outside this moment meant losing control of what was inside it. And control was everything. "Stay focused," he said sharply, though his voice didn't carry the same certainty as before. Aaliyah heard it. The shift. Small, but real. "They're here," she repeated. Not louder, not dramatic, just final. Reynolds tightened his grip on her wrist again. "Yeah," he replied, "and you're still not going anywhere." But this time, the words didn't land the same. Because the energy in the room had already changed. The crowd wasn't watching him anymore. They were watching the entrance, waiting, anticipating. And then, they appeared. 3 men stepped into view. Not rushing, not hesitant. Moving with the kind of purpose that made people step out of the way without being asked. Dark suits, earpieces, posture that spoke before they did. Behind them through the glass, 2 black SUVs sat angled near the curb, engines still running. No lights, no sirens. They didn't need them. The first man's eyes scanned the room once. Quick, efficient. Then locked onto Aaliyah. Everything else became secondary. He walked straight toward her. The crowd parted instinctively. No one spoke. No one dared. Reynolds finally turned, his expression tightening as the man approached. "Can I help you?" Reynolds asked, his tone controlled, but edged now with something new. Uncertainty. The man didn't answer immediately. His gaze dropped briefly to Reynolds' hand, still gripping Aaliyah's wrist, then back up. Slowly, deliberately. "You can start by letting her go," he said. The voice was calm, even, but it carried weight. The kind that didn't ask twice. Reynolds didn't move. "Sir, you need to step back," he replied. "This is an active, let her go." This time, the interruption was immediate, sharper, final. The room went still, completely still. Even the background noise of the mall seemed to fade. Because everyone felt it, this wasn't a request. Reynolds' jaw tightened. His grip didn't loosen. "Identify yourself," he said. The man reached into his jacket. Slowly. Not threatening, but deliberate enough that Carter's hand instinctively moved closer to his own belt. Then a badge appeared. Flashed just long enough. Federal. Carter's eyes widened slightly. Reynolds didn't react. Not fully. Not yet. "Step aside," the man said. Reynolds shook his head once. "No," he replied. "Not until I understand what's going on." The man studied him for a second, then spoke clear, measured, but with just enough emphasis to shift the ground beneath them. "What's going on is that you're detaining someone you don't have the authority to detain." The words landed. Hard. Carter took a small step back. Almost involuntary. Reynolds didn't. "Sir, with all due respect," he said, his voice tightening. "This is a local matter." "No," the man cut in again. "It stopped being local 5 minutes ago." Silence. Absolute. The kind that made every breath in the room feel too loud. Reeves, who had been standing near the counter, shifted uncomfortably. His confidence gone, replaced by something closer to calculation. Because now, he wasn't sure which side of the situation he was on. Reynolds glanced briefly at Carter, looking for something. Support, confirmation, anything. Carter didn't give it. His eyes were on the badge, then on Aaliyah, then back to the man in front of them. Something wasn't adding up. Or maybe everything was. Reynolds turned back, slowly, his grip on Aaliyah's wrist still firm, but not as steady. "Who exactly are we talking about?" he asked. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that the distance between authority and consequence disappeared. Then he said, "You're talking about Mrs. Aaliyah Bennett." The name hung in the air, but it didn't mean anything. Not yet. Reynolds's expression didn't change. "Okay," he said. And the man held his gaze, unblinking. "And you're about to make a mistake that won't stay in this building." A beat passed, then another. The tension stretched thin, fragile, ready to snap. Aaliyah finally spoke, for the first time since they entered. "You should let go," she said quietly. Reynolds looked at her, then back at the man, then at the badge again. Something flickered. Doubt. Small, but growing. Behind them, one of the other suited men stepped forward, leaning slightly toward the first, a whisper, too quiet for the crowd, but not for the moment, because whatever was said changed something. The first man straightened, then looked back at Reynolds. One last time. "Release her," he said. Not louder, not harsher, but heavier, as if the weight of everything that was about to follow sat behind those two words. Reynolds hesitated, for the first time. His fingers loosened, just slightly, not enough to let go, but enough to show it, and everyone saw it, the shift, the crack, the moment where certainty began to break. Because now, for the first time since this started, Reynolds wasn't sure he was in control anymore. And Aaliyah. She already knew he wasn't. Reynolds felt it before he admitted it. The shift. Subtle. Unwelcome. Irreversible. His fingers were still around Aaliyah's wrist, but the certainty behind that grip had changed. It wasn't control anymore. It was hesitation. And hesitation in front of a crowd was visible. Last time, the suited man said, his tone no longer firm, but final. "Let her go." The words didn't rise in volume. They didn't need to. Because now it wasn't just him speaking. It was everything behind him. Authority, structure, consequences. Reynolds swallowed once, barely noticeable, then tightened his jaw. "You're stepping into an active situation," he said, forcing his voice back into shape. "If you have jurisdiction, you can state it. Otherwise, Daniel." The voice came from behind him. Carter. Quiet, but urgent. Reynolds didn't turn. "Not now," he muttered. Daniel Carter repeated a little louder. "Look outside." That made him pause. Just enough. Just long enough. Reynolds turned his head slightly toward the glass storefront, and that's when he saw them. Not just the SUVs, more. A third vehicle had pulled up. Then a fourth. Uniformed personnel now stood near the entrance of the mall, holding positions, scanning, coordinating. Not chaotic, not reactive. Prepared. Controlled. Intentional. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was deployment. Reynolds's expression changed. Just a fraction. But enough. He turned back. Slowly. The man in the suit was still there. Unmoved. Watching him. Waiting. "Who exactly did you call?" Reynolds asked. The question wasn't directed at the man. It was directed at Aaliyah. Finally. Acknowledging her. Seeing her. Aaliyah didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. Because at that exact moment, another figure stepped into the store. This one didn't move like the others. Didn't blend. Didn't wait. He walked in with a presence that cut through everything else. Mid-50s. Tall, composed, military posture, not exaggerated. Not performative. Real. Every step precise. Measured. Commanding. The conversations died instantly. Completely. Because something about him made silence feel necessary. Two of the suited men stepped aside without being asked. The first man straightened slightly. Respectfully. Not formally, but clearly. The new arrival didn't look at them. Not yet. His eyes went directly to Aaliyah, and for the first time since this began, her expression changed. Not relief. Not fear. Recognition. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was calm, deep, controlled. But beneath it, something else. Concern. Real. Aaliyah gave a small nod. "I'm fine," she said. The room felt it. That exchange. Simple, but loaded. Because suddenly, this wasn't just a situation. It was a connection. Reynolds stepped forward slightly, trying to reclaim something. Anything. "Sir, I'm going to need you to identify yourself," he said. The man turned his head, slowly, and when his eyes met Reynolds's, everything stopped. Not physically, but internally. Because there was no uncertainty in that gaze. No question, no hesitation, just command. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in," the man said. Not loudly, but clearly. Reynolds opened his mouth, then closed it. Because something in his mind finally clicked. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Carter saw it too. His posture shifted. Subtly. Respectfully. Because now he recognized it. Rank, presence, authority that didn't need explanation. Still, Reynolds pushed once more. "Sir, with all due respect," the suited man stepped in. Not aggressively, but decisively. "Officer," he said, his voice cutting clean, "you are currently detaining the spouse of a 4-star general." The words landed like impact. Sharp, immediate, irrefutable. The room froze. Completely. Even the people recording paused. Because for a second no one processed it. Reynolds blinked. Once. Then again. As if trying to reset what he just heard. "I'm sorry," what he said. The suited man didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. Because the general stepped forward, one step, then another, until he stood directly in front of Reynolds, close enough that the difference between them wasn't physical. It was structural. "You heard him," the general said. No anger, no raised voice, just certainty. Absolute. Reynolds's hand, still on Aaliyah's wrist, froze. Then slowly, very slowly, he let go. The contact broke, and the moment shifted. Completely. Carter stepped back immediately. Instinct. Recognition. Reynolds didn't. Not right away. Because his mind was still catching up. Still trying to reconcile the woman he had just accused, the woman he had just restrained, was not who he thought she was, not even close. Around them, whispers exploded, low, fast, uncontrolled. A 4-star general, his wife. "Are you serious?" Phones zoomed in closer, capturing every reaction, every shift, every crack. Reeves took a step back, then another, his confidence gone, replaced by something closer to panic. Because now, this wasn't a store issue. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exposure. Public. Recorded. Irreversible. Reynolds finally found his voice. This wasn't communicated, he said, the words coming out slower now. "We were responding to a report." The general raised a hand. Not aggressively, just enough. And Reynolds stopped talking. Immediately. Because now there was no confusion about who controlled the situation. "You responded," the general said. "A beat. You assumed. Another. You acted." Silence. Each word precise, measured, delivered without emotion. And somehow that made it worse. Reynolds's hands hovered near his sides, uncertain, unsteady. For the first time since this began, he didn't know where to put them, didn't know what to do with them. Because now everything he had done was being seen from the outside, from above, from a level he hadn't considered. Aaliyah stepped slightly forward, not behind the general, not shielded, beside him. Equal, composed. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, but final. "I told you," she said. Reynolds didn't respond, couldn't, because now there was nothing left to say, only consequences, and they were already in motion. For a few seconds, no one moved. Not the crowd, not the officers, not even the air. It was as if the entire space inside Maison Laurent had been placed on pause, every eye locked onto the same point, every thought struggling to catch up with what had just been said. The spouse of a 4-star general. The words didn't just hang there. They pressed down, heavy, unavoidable. Officer Daniel Reynolds stood frozen where he was, his hand now empty at his side, fingers slightly curled, as if still holding something that was no longer there. His gaze shifted first to Aaliyah, then to the man beside her, then briefly to the federal badge again, as though hoping the meaning might change if he looked at it long enough. It didn't. Carter was the first to fully react. He took a step back, then another. Not dramatic, not loud, but clear. Distance, respect, recognition. "Sir," Carter began, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier certainty. "We weren't informed." "No," the suited agent cut in his tone, measured but firm. "You weren't." Another step forward, another shift. "But you didn't ask either." That landed. Carter's jaw tightened. Because it was true. Reynolds still hadn't spoken. His eyes were locked on Aaliyah now, really seeing her for the first time. Not scanning, not judging. Seeing. And what he saw didn't match the narrative he had built. Didn't fit the assumption he had acted on. Didn't align with anything that had justified his actions just minutes ago. This, Reynolds started, his voice rougher than before. "This is a misunderstanding." Aaliyah didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because the room itself had already decided otherwise. The general stepped slightly forward. Not aggressively, but with presence. "You had an opportunity to clarify," he said. Each word deliberate. "You chose not to." Reynolds swallowed, his throat dry. "We were responding to a report of a..." "Report," the general repeated. Not louder, but sharper. Enough to stop him. Reynolds closed his mouth. Because now every explanation sounded smaller than it had before. Weaker. Excuses, not reasons. Behind them, Dalton Reeves shifted again, his polished composure cracking under the weight of what was unfolding. His eyes darted between the general, the officers, and Aaliyah, calculating, recalculating, searching for a position that no longer existed. This was a store concern, Reeves interjected suddenly, stepping forward just enough to be heard. We followed protocol. The transaction was declined multiple times, run it again. The voice cut clean through him. Aaliyah's. Calm. Precise? Final? Reeves blinked. I'm sorry, the card, she said, her eyes never leaving his. Run it again. For a brief moment, no one moved. Then the suited agent turned slightly toward the counter. Do it, he said. Not loudly, but with enough authority to erase hesitation. Reeves nodded quickly. Of course. He turned to Emily, who had gone completely still behind the register. Run it again, he repeated this time, his voice tight. Emily's hands moved. Not as steady as before. She picked up the card from the counter where Aaliyah had placed it earlier, inserted it, pressed confirm, and waited. The room held its breath. Every second stretched. 1, 2, 3. Beep. A different sound this time. Short, clean, final. Emily's eyes dropped to the screen, then widened. Just slightly. Her lips parted. It went through, she said. The words came out barely above a whisper, but they carried. Across the room, through the crowd, into every phone recording, through every assumption that had been made. Silence followed. Not shocked, not confused. Certain. Because now there was proof, not opinion, not narrative. Proof. Reynolds's face changed, color draining, not dramatically, but enough. His lips parted slightly as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. Carter closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, slower. He knew. He understood. And that understanding weighed more than anything said out loud. Reeves stepped back again, further this time. His posture no longer controlled, no longer confident. Now exposed. This must have been a system error, he said quickly, the words tumbling over each other. Occasionally these terminals, no, the agent said. Flat. Immediate. Cutting him off completely. Reeves stopped talking, because there was nothing left to defend, nothing left to explain, because the truth didn't need explanation. It needed acknowledgement, and none of them had given it when it mattered. Aaliyah reached forward, picked up the receipt as it printed, her movements steady, unrushed, as if none of this had shaken her. As if she had already known how this would end. She glanced at the total briefly. $4,800. Paid. Approved. Documented. Then she set the receipt back down. Not to keep, but to leave. A statement. Reynolds finally found his voice. This wasn't he started, but the words collapsed before they could form. Because what could he say? That he didn't know, that he assumed, that he acted too quickly. None of it mattered now, because all of it had already happened. Publicly. Irreversibly. The general looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something far worse. Disappointment. You didn't verify, he said. A pause. You didn't listen. Another. You didn't think. Each sentence quieter than the last. But heavier. Reynolds's hands trembled slightly. Just enough. Just visible. The room noticed. The cameras caught it. The moment when authority realized it had overstepped. Carter stepped forward slightly. Not to defend, not to justify, but to separate himself just enough from what had happened. "Sir, we'll file a full report," he said. The agent nodded once. "You will," he replied. "No threat, no escalation, just certainty. Because now, it was no longer about what had happened here. It was about what would happen next." Reynolds looked at Aaliyah one last time, trying to find something, understanding, forgiveness, anything. She didn't give it. She just looked back. Calm. Unmoved. Finished. And in that moment he understood something he hadn't before. This was never about the bag. Never about the card. Never about the transaction. It was about the assumption he made the moment he saw her, and everything that followed was built on that. The receipt printed with a soft, mechanical hum. Thin paper. Black ink. One clear word at the bottom, approved. No delay, no error, no hesitation. It slid forward from the terminal, as if it had always been waiting to prove something no one here had bothered to verify. For a moment, no one reached for it, because the meaning of it had already landed. Harder than any accusation, heavier than any explanation. Aaliyah looked at it briefly, then picked it up between two fingers. Her movements were steady, almost detached, as if this was the least important part of what had just happened. She didn't smile, didn't react. She simply placed the receipt flat on the counter. Visible, undeniable. And then she stepped back. The bag still sat where it had been the entire time, untouched. Unclaimed. Because this had never been about the bag. Not really. The general remained beside her, his posture unchanged, his presence anchoring the room in a way no authority had managed to do before. He didn't rush to speak, didn't escalate. He waited. And that waiting made everything else louder, the shifting feet, the shallow breaths, the quiet realization settling across every face in the room. Then, he turned, slowly, toward Officer Reynolds. And in that single movement, the balance of the entire situation tilted. "You're going to explain," the general said. No raised voice, no anger. But the weight behind the words was absolute. Reynolds straightened instinctively, shoulders tightening, chin lifting slightly, as if muscle memory could restore what had already been lost. "Sir, I was responding to a report," he began. A small motion of the general's hand stopped him. Effortless, immediate. And Reynolds fell silent. Because now, for the first time since this began, he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't about his version of events. It was about his actions. The suited federal agent stepped forward, his presence cutting cleanly into the space Reynolds had occupied just moments ago. "Officer Daniel Reynolds," he said, voice steady, controlled. "Badge number 4172. Reynolds's eyes flicked toward him, then back, then down. "You are being placed under immediate administrative review, pending investigation into conduct, use of authority, and procedural violations." Each word landed with precision. Not rushed. Not emotional. Just final. Reynolds blinked. Once. Then again. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Because the ground had already shifted beneath him. From control to consequence. "This is a misunderstanding," Reynolds managed, finally, his voice lower now, less certain. "We were acting on what we were told. We had a report of—" "You had a report," the general interrupted quietly. Not louder, just sharper. Reynolds stopped. Again. You didn't verify it, the general continued. You didn't question it. You didn't slow down. A pause. You acted. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before, because there was no argument that could stand against that sequence, no explanation that could undo it. Carter stepped back fully now, creating space not just physically, but professionally. His posture shifted shoulders, lowering slightly, as if distancing himself from the weight of what had unfolded. Sir Carter said carefully, addressing the agent, "I'll cooperate fully. I'll provide a complete statement." The agent nodded once. "You will," he said, "before end of day." Carter didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." Reynolds looked at him. Really looked this time. And what he saw wasn't betrayal. It was alignment, with procedure, with accountability, with something higher than either of them. That realization landed quietly, but it stayed. Behind them, Dalton Reeves shifted again, his confidence completely gone now. The polished manager who had controlled the narrative minutes ago was replaced by someone trying desperately to rewrite it. "This wasn't intentional," Reeves said quickly, stepping forward just enough to insert himself back into the moment. "There was a system error. We followed standard protocol. We were trying to protect the store, no." The general's voice cut through him. Not raised, not aggressive, but absolute. Reeves froze mid-sentence, because something in that single word made it clear he had no standing here anymore. "You initiated the assumption," the general said, his eyes steady. "You escalated it, and you made it public, each sentence precise, measured, delivered without emotion, which made them impossible to deflect." Reeves swallowed hard. His mouth opened, closed. Nothing came out, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. The agent turned slightly, addressing another member of his team. "Preserve all surveillance footage," he said. "Full documentation. Corporate notification." "Yes, sir," came the immediate response. Phones were still raised, still recording, because now, this wasn't just a confrontation. It was evidence. Reynolds stood still, his hands hovering awkwardly near his sides, unsure where to rest now that authority had slipped from them. "This wasn't personal," he said, quieter now. "We were just doing our job." The general looked at him, held the gaze for a moment, then replied, "Your job is to think." A pause. To verify. Another. To treat people like they belong there until proven otherwise. The words didn't hit like accusations. They landed like facts, and that made them heavier. Reynolds's shoulders dropped slightly. Not in surrender, in realization. Because now, he could see it. Not from his perspective, from the outside, from the cameras, from the people who had watched him decide who she was before he had any right to. The agent spoke again. "Officer Reynolds, you are to surrender your badge and service weapon pending investigation. No drama, no emphasis, just procedure." Reynolds hesitated, just for a second. Then, his hand moved. He unclipped his badge, first holding it for a brief moment long enough for the weight of it to register. Then he handed it over. The metallic contact was soft, but final. Then the weapon. Secured, removed, transferred, clean, controlled, but irreversible. The crowd shifted again. Not closer, but differently. Because now they weren't watching a conflict. They were watching accountability. A reversal. Public. Unavoidable. Aaliyah stood still through all of it. No satisfaction. No visible reaction. Because this was never about proving she was right. It was about correcting something that should never have happened in the first place. The general turned toward her again. "Are you ready to leave?" he asked, his voice softer now. Grounded. Aaliyah glanced around the store. At the faces, at the phones, at the space that had tried to define her minutes earlier. Then she nodded once. Yes. Simple. Final. They turned to go, but before she stepped away, Aaliyah paused. Looked back. Not at Reynolds. Not at Reeves. At the room, at everyone. And when she spoke, her voice carried. Clear. Steady. Unshaken. "You had every opportunity to get this right," she said. A pause. "You chose not to. No anger, no accusation. Just truth." And that truth stayed. Long after she turned away. Long after the uniforms shifted. Long after the cameras stopped recording. Because some moments don't end when people leave. They linger. In silence, in memory, in consequence. And this was one of them. By 6:12 p.m. that same evening, the video had already reached 2 million views. It started with a shaky frame, someone standing near the entrance of Maison Laurent, whispering into their phone as they zoomed in. "They've got her detained. Yeah, right here." Then the footage stabilized, and everything unfolded. The grip on her wrist, the tone, the words. "People like you." It didn't take long. Clips were cut, shared, reposted. The moment spread across platforms faster than anyone inside that boutique could have imagined. By nightfall, it wasn't just a video. It was a headline. "Black woman publicly detained at Arlington Mall. Turns out she's married to 4-star general." The title wasn't what held people. It was the details. The slow escalation, the lack of evidence, the certainty in the officers' voices before any verification, and the silence right after the truth came out. That silence said more than anything else. Inside Arlington Square Mall, things didn't return to normal. They couldn't. Not after what had happened. Not after what had been recorded. Not after the world had seen it. By 7 p.m., Maison Laurent had already closed its doors early. Not officially. No announcement. But the lights dimmed, the security shutters lowered halfway, and employees were quietly escorted out through the back. Emily Carter didn't speak as she left. She couldn't. Because the clip that showed her hesitation, her tone, her words, was already circulating, slowed down, replayed, analyzed. Her face had become part of the narrative. Dalton Reeves stayed longer, not by choice. 2 corporate representatives arrived just before closing. No introductions, no pleasantries. Just quiet, controlled conversation behind closed doors. The kind that didn't need to be overheard to be understood. At 7:43 p.m., Reeves walked out. His tie loosened. His expression drained. He didn't look at anyone. Didn't acknowledge the cameras still lingering outside the mall entrance. Because he already knew this wasn't going away. Across the city, the Arlington Police Department was dealing with something very different. Not a call, not a case, a situation. Internal, public, explosive. By 8:10 p.m., Officer Daniel Reynolds had been officially placed on administrative leave. The statement was brief, carefully worded. The Arlington Police Department is aware of an incident involving one of our officers at Arlington Square Mall. The officer has been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. We are committed to transparency and accountability. It wasn't enough. Not for the public, not for the people who had watched the video, because what they saw didn't need interpretation. It needed acknowledgement. Carter submitted his report before 9 p.m. Every detail, Every moment. Accurate, complete. He didn't try to soften it, didn't try to justify it, because he knew the footage would say the rest, and discrepancies would only make it worse. Inside his apartment later that night, Carter sat in silence, the glow of his phone reflecting off the walls as he watched the video again. Not once, not twice, over and over. He paused at the moment Reynolds grabbed her wrist, paused again when he spoke, paused at the exact second the general walked in. Each time, the same realization settled deeper. This could have been stopped at any point. But it wasn't, because no one slowed down, no one questioned, and no one listened. Meanwhile, Aaliyah Bennett didn't watch the video. She didn't need to. By the time she and General Marcus Bennett left the mall, everything that mattered had already happened. The exposure, the correction, the consequence. They drove in silence at first, the city lights passing in controlled streaks outside the window. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You handled that well," he said. Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. She looked out ahead. Focused. Still. "I didn't handle anything," she said quietly. "I endured it. The distinction mattered." Marcus nodded once, because he understood, because he had seen it before. Different setting. Same pattern. Different assumptions. Same outcome. Until it wasn't. "They won't forget this," he said. Aaliyah shook her head slightly. "They shouldn't have to remember," she replied. "It shouldn't happen in the first place." Later that night, requests started coming in. Media, statements, interviews, declined. All of them. Because this wasn't about visibility. It was about truth. And the truth had already been seen. At 10:26 p.m., a second video surfaced. Different angle. Clearer audio. It captured something the first one hadn't fully shown: Carter's hesitation. His attempt small but real to slow things down. The internet noticed. The narrative shifted slightly. Not fully, but enough to separate roles. Responsibility. Choice. Because not everyone had acted the same, and that mattered. By midnight, the story had moved beyond Arlington. National coverage, commentary, debate. But beneath all of it, one thing remained consistent. The moment, the grip, the assumption, and the silence that followed the truth. Back at the mall, the space outside Maison Laurent sat empty. Lights off. Glass reflecting nothing but darkness. But if you stood there long enough, you could almost still feel it. The tension. The shift. The exact moment everything changed. Because some places remember. Even when people try to move on. And this one would. 3 days later, the room was quieter than the mall had ever been. No polished marble floors, no soft lighting, no curious crowd leaning in, just rows of chairs, muted walls, and a long table where decisions, real ones, were made. The internal affairs hearing began at 9 a.m. sharp. No delays, no cameras allowed inside. But outside, press lined the sidewalk, waiting. Because even without access, they knew this moment mattered. Inside, Officer Daniel Reynolds sat at the far end of the table, uniform pressed. Straight. But the confidence that once defined him was gone. In its place, control. Forced. Measured. Fragile. Across from him, a panel of 3 investigators reviewed documents, reports, transcripts, and most importantly, the footage. Not just one video. Multiple angles, Multiple perspectives, each one filling in what the others missed, each one removing any space left for interpretation. Officer Reynolds. One of the investigators began, her voice. Neutral, practiced. We're going to walk through the sequence of events. At any point, you may clarify your actions. Reynolds nodded. Yes, ma'am. The first video played. No sound at first. Just movement. Him approaching. Her standing still. The crowd forming. Then audio, clear, undeniable. People like you always think the rules don't apply. The room didn't react outwardly. No visible expressions, no comments. But the weight of the words settled differently here. More precisely. More permanently. Can you explain what you meant by that statement? The investigator asked. Reynolds inhaled slowly, held it, then released. It was taken out of context, he said. I was referring to individuals who refused to cooperate during an investigation. The investigator didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch. Then, did you have probable cause to detain Ms. Bennett at that time? Reynolds hesitated. Just for a fraction. Then, we had reasonable suspicion based on the report from store management, he replied. Did you verify that report? A pause. No. Did you request a reattempt of the transaction before escalation? Another pause. No. Did you consider alternative explanations for the failed transaction? This time longer. No. The pattern formed. Clear. Simple. Unavoidable. Across the table, another investigator leaned forward slightly. Officer Reynolds, are you aware that your actions escalated the situation without confirming any underlying facts? Reynolds nodded. Yes. And do you acknowledge that your conduct contributed to the public mischaracterization of Ms. Bennett? Another pause. Yes. No defensiveness. No argument. Because here, there was no audience to perform for. Only accountability. Carter sat in a separate chair along the side of the room. Silent. Observing. He had already submitted his report. Already given his statement. Now he watched, not with satisfaction, not with distance, but with clarity, because he understood something now that he hadn't fully grasped in that moment. Silence was participation, and he had been silent. The footage continued, frame by frame, angle by angle, until it reached the moment everything changed. The arrival, the badge, the general, the release. And finally the receipt, approved. The investigator paused the video, looked directly at Reynolds. Is there anything in this footage that you dispute? Reynolds shook his head. No. Another pause. Then, do you believe your actions aligned with department standards? The question hung. He didn't answer immediately. Because now, the answer mattered, not just for the case, but for everything that followed. No, he said finally. The word landed clean. No hesitation, no qualifier, just truth. Outside, the press shifted as the doors opened briefly. A representative stepped out, handing a printed statement to waiting reporters. Cameras clicked instantly. Voices overlapped. What's the outcome? Was he terminated? Any charges? Inside, the final decision was being delivered. Effective immediately, the lead investigator said, her tone steady. Officer Daniel Reynolds is terminated from the Arlington Police Department. A pause. Further review will determine eligibility for decertification. No reaction, not outwardly, but Reynolds's shoulders dropped. Just slightly. The finality of it settling in. Across the room, Carter lowered his gaze. Not in shame, not in relief, just recognition. Because this wasn't just about one officer. It was about a system, a moment, A decision that could have gone differently, but didn't. Later that afternoon, a separate announcement was released. Maison Laurent. Corporate statement. We deeply regret the incident that occurred at our Arlington location. The actions taken by store management did not reflect our values or standards. The employee involved has been terminated, and we are implementing immediate policy reviews and staff retraining. It read like most statements did. Careful, measured, controlled. But the impact had already been felt. Publicly. Irreversibly. That evening, Aaliyah was invited to speak. Not required, not pressured. Invited. A small, controlled setting. Community leaders. Legal representatives. No media. Just people who understood what had happened and why it mattered. She stood at the front of the room. No notes, no script. Just presence. They didn't know who I was, she said. A pause. And that's exactly the point. Silence. Complete. Because nothing about that situation should have required them to know. Her voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. Respect isn't conditional, she continued, and dignity isn't something you verify after the fact. She looked around the room, making eye contact, holding it. They weren't wrong because of who I am, she said. They were wrong because of what they assumed. The words stayed, long after she stepped away, because they didn't just explain what happened. They clarified why it mattered, and why it couldn't be ignored. 2 weeks later, Arlington Square Mall looked exactly the same. The marble floors still reflected the soft golden lights. The storefronts still displayed perfection behind spotless glass. The quiet hum of controlled luxury still filled the air. From the outside, nothing had changed. But for the people who had been there that day, everything had. Maison Laurent reopened on a Monday morning at precisely 10 a.m. No grand announcement, no public event. Just a clean storefront, new staff, and a subtle difference in posture. Employees who now watched more carefully, spoke more deliberately, and paused just a little longer before making assumptions. Because training could be updated. Policies could be rewritten. But memory changed behavior. Aaliyah Bennett walked through the mall again that afternoon. Not to revisit, not to relive, just to move forward. She wore the same kind of calm she always had composed, self-contained, unshaken. An ivory blazer, dark jeans, steady steps. Nothing about her invited attention, and yet some people recognized her. Not loudly, not openly, but in the way they paused just a fraction too long. In the way conversations softened as she passed. In the way eyes followed not with judgment this time, but awareness. She didn't acknowledge it, because she hadn't come for that. She passed the spot outside Maison Laurent without stopping. But for a brief moment, her eyes shifted. Just slightly, taking it in. Not the store, not the people, the space. The exact place where everything had unfolded, where assumption had turned into action, where action had turned into consequence, and where for a few minutes the truth had been forced into the open. Then she kept walking, because some places don't need revisiting. They just need to be left behind. At the far end of the mall, near a smaller boutique, something caught her attention. A young black woman stood at a counter holding a pair of sunglasses. Her posture was uncertain. Shoulders slightly tense, fingers tightening around the frame as a sales associate spoke to her with a tone that was just a little too sharp, a little too questioning. "Do you have the receipt?" the employee asked. The question itself wasn't wrong, but the delivery. The assumption felt familiar. The young woman hesitated. "I just picked them up from the display," she said. The employee's expression didn't soften. Instead, she crossed her arms slightly. "We've had issues before," she said. "I just need to make sure." There it was again. Different words, same pattern. Aaliyah watched for a moment. Just long enough. Then she stepped forward. Not aggressively, not dramatically. Just, "Present. Is there a problem?" she asked. Both women turned. The employee straightened slightly, her tone shifting instantly. "No, ma'am, we're just verifying." Aaliyah finished. The word landed differently this time. The employee nodded, yes. Aaliyah looked at the young woman, then back at the employee. "Then verify," she said calmly, without assuming. The silence that followed was brief, but enough. The employee's posture shifted again. Subtly, she uncrossed her arms, adjusted her tone. "Of course," she said softer now. "Let me check the system." The tension eased. Just a little. The young woman exhaled quietly. Relief. Small, but real. Aaliyah gave her a slight nod. Nothing more. No speech. No explanation. Because sometimes the lesson didn't need to be repeated. It just needed to be applied. She turned and walked away. No audience, no cameras, no moment to capture. Just a correction, the kind that should have happened the first time. Outside the mall, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. The world moved as it always did, cars passing people, walking conversations blending into the background. Normal. On the surface. But somewhere beneath that normal, something had shifted. Because stories like this didn't end when the cameras stopped recording. They carried forward. In decisions. In pauses. In the space between assumption and action. That night, the original video still circulated, still shared, still discussed. But now, it wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what had changed. In people. In awareness. In the understanding that sometimes the difference between justice and injustice was only a few seconds, a few questions, a few choices. And those choices mattered. More than titles. More than rank. More than who someone was connected to. Because not everyone had a call to make. Not everyone had someone powerful walking through the door, and that was the truth that stayed. Aaliyah stood by her window that evening, looking out over the quiet city lights. No noise. No pressure. Just stillness. She didn't think about the video. Didn't replay the moment. Because she didn't need to. What mattered had already been understood. And when she turned away from the window, there was no weight left in her posture. No tension. No unfinished business. Just clarity. Because dignity wasn't something she gained that day. It was something she had always carried. And now, it had simply been seen.